1:03, so I just want to get us moving. So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining. My name is Juan Marcano, and I have the honor and pleasure of chairing TAPS. And I want to hand it off to Councilor Medina to introduce himself.
Yes, Councilmember Medina, part of this committee, Ward 3. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, sir. So first item of business here is to approve the September 28th meeting minutes. I do not have any changes. Councilor Medina?
For me.
All right, great. So those will stand approved. Next up, consent. I don't see anything there, so we'll move us down into general business. So 4A, consideration to approve a resolution for the intergovernmental agreement with CDOT for Laredo Street over Highline Canal Bridge replacement project. And Mike, you've got the floor. Oh. Mike, are you with us?
Yeah, I think I was able to turn the. Oh, can you hear me now?
We can hear you. So I think if you just turn on your camera, you should be good to go now.
Okay.
Hey, there you are.
Yes, thank you. This is a little different for me. I used WebEx many years ago, so it's first time again coming back to it. It's like riding a bicycle, I think, but it still takes a little practice.
Yep.
Anyway, good afternoon. I'm going to share my presentation here, our presentation here with you. So bear with me. I'm hoping that you can see it now. Can you see the presentation?
Yep.
Okay. Today is Laredo Street over Highline Canal Bridge replacement. And with that, I'm Mike Moseni, project engineer, public works, City of Aurora, retired employee from CDOT in bridge and roadway design, management, supervisor, and with a 29 years of CDOT experience background. And I've been with the city for 5.5 years now, going into 6 years. And I'm having a lot of fun here. So today I'm trying to present the Laredo Street over Highline Canal Bridge, and I am going to present existing condition, history of grant and project overview, schedule and budget, question for the committee, and then a question from the committee. As you can see, going with the existing condition, the photos that you can, the pictures that you can see here shows a plan view from the top. And as you can see, there's a lot of problems with the deck area because the girders are actually representing the deck itself. That and the sidewalk, as you can see, is falling. The girders have not had the latest code when it was designed in 1970 and built, so they have some issues with cracks at the end being unconfined. So history of grant request and project overview. October 26, 2022, City of Aurora attempts request grant to replace existing bridge through Colorado Municipal League nonprofit organization, which works with cities and municipalities to cater to their needs. April 23, 23, after several attempts and presenting different documents to them, Aurora receives approval letter from CML to fund bridge replacement. October 26, 2023, which is today, we're in TAPS for approval of to execute CDOT funding IGA. Just to give you a little bit of the scope of work here, as you can see on the right side, there is the depiction of the section views of the new structure. It would be a CBC bridge. Design and construction would be for a vehicular bridge, which spans Laredo Street over Highline Canal. By the way, Laredo Street, for those that may not know exactly where it's located, it's about 5 blocks east of Chambers on Colfax, and then the bridge itself is 2 to 3 blocks north on Laredo. We're replacing an aging structurally poor, deficient category bridge. We have a few of those bridges we've been able to get grants for, and then hopefully we can one by one replace all of those bridges too. On this bridge, we're going to include new CDOT bridge rail approach slab, approach rails, and the rails and bridge rails. As I mentioned, it's going to be a concrete box culvert, approximately 22 feet, 59 feet wide. We're going to have new wing walls, wider sidewalks. We'll correct the existing non-standard bridge items and improve the channel flow. We have the proposed schedule and budget here. The proposed schedule would be for 24, early 2024 to have the IGA executed, and for the fiscal year 2024-25, design and environmental assessments would be taking place. 26-27, we're planning to be in construction, and hopefully by 27 or early 28, the new structure open to traffic. Total estimated bridge replacement cost is $2,223,700. CMLC federal award or have the funding share, and the funding is as follows: federal 80%, local 20%. For the numbers you see on the screen, 1.8 million almost, and 445,000 for the local, for a total of 2.223. With that, my presentation is over. I have a question for the committee. Does the council committee support moving forward the resolution and the intergovernmental IGA, Colorado Department of Transportation and City of Aurora for Laredo Street over Highline Canal Bridge replacement project to the December 11th study session? I'm here to entertain any questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mike, for the presentation. Councilor Medina, do you have any questions or comments?
Well, thank you, Mike, for the presentation. Now it looks like that bridge is definitely overdue. So I'm glad
Yes.
getting some attention.
Agreed.
Yeah, and likewise, I think that bridge needs some love, and I'm really excited to see that the federal part of this is 80%. I think that's very generous, and Lord knows we need some infrastructure investment, so strongly support this.
Yep.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you, sir.
Yep.
All righty. Next up on our agenda is 4B, Vision Zero and Transportation Safety Evaluations. I believe, Carly, you're up for this one.
Yes, this is my item. Let me know if you can see my screen. Everybody see it now? Okay, great. All right. My name is Carly Campuzano. I'm the traffic manager in the Public Works Department. And this presentation is on Vision Zero and how we conduct transportation safety evaluations. This presentation is informational only and was requested previously, I think, by you, Chair Marcano, a few months back. And you'll notice this looks pretty similar to the presentation that we went over in your ward meeting recently as well.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Never mind, it's brand new. So here's the presentation agenda. First, I'll go over what Vision Zero is. Then I'll go over the safe system approach, which is our approach to safety evaluations. From there, I'll touch on some national crash metrics, as well as Aurora and Colorado specific crash metrics. And then I'll go over next steps, which is some of the projects that we have in the pipeline. So first, just wanted to go over what Vision Zero actually is. So Vision Zero is an initiative that was started in the 90s in Europe. The core principle is that it's never acceptable for people to be killed or seriously injured on our transportation system. And so typically agencies that formally adopt Vision Zero agree or commit to reducing deaths and serious injuries to zero by a certain year or within a certain time frame. So as I said, this was originally started in the 90s, and then in the United States, it's grown quite a bit in the last 20 or 30 years. About 45 communities have adopted Vision Zero formally. And then in Colorado, these 4 agencies listed here have formally adopted Vision Zero. And this is relatively recently, from 2016 to current. So when we talk about adopting Vision Zero, it's generally more than the initial stage, which is generally a political commitment. So elements of Vision Zero do tend to start with a political commitment, which is something I think that you're very familiar with on your end with how we pass resolutions and those sorts of things. But then with Vision Zero as well, there's generally a multidisciplinary leadership team established, or sometimes called a task force for the Vision Zero efforts. A safety action plan is developed, and then the safe systems approach is used, which I'll go over soon in a couple slides. The approach to reviewing crashes and safety is data-driven. It involves community engagement and really focuses on transparency. So when you formally adopt Vision Zero, generally there are annual metrics that are reported through that by doing that. So next I wanted to touch on how we already do safety reviews in the city of Aurora. So even though Aurora is not an agency that has formally adopted Vision Zero, reviewing our roadway network for safety improvements and really, I think, evaluating and implementing projects has really been at the core of what we do in the Public Works Department for a long time now. So we have different crash software that we use to do this. So we have a specific software package that's used by the state as well. That's very commonly used in Colorado that helps us filter for crash areas, identify correctable patterns, come up with solutions. We also have access to the Aurora PD's crash database, which is a great resource for us. The crash database is very up to date and contains a lot of information that helps us to evaluate kind of the higher level, or I guess more the detailed causes of crashes. So we're able to see the crash reports, the investigation documents, and those sorts of things. We regularly conduct safety reviews and screen for crash patterns. We also get alerts from our police department pretty quickly about fatal and serious injury crashes, and we review all fatal crashes in detail pretty quickly after they happen. Oftentimes there's limited amount of information available at first, but we do get some initial information from the police department that helps us to do these reviews and to work with them. We coordinate with internal and external stakeholders. So I've mentioned the police department. We obviously coordinate really extensively with them, but we coordinate with other city departments as well as needed. And then we are actively coordinating with external parties, whether it be council or residents, but we also participate in regional safety meetings and initiatives. So we're on regular meetings that are hosted by the Denver Regional Council of Governments related to Vision Zero. And crash analysis and crash patterns. We are also actively participate with different subgroups in the region on specific initiatives. So we're regularly, for example, in communication with Denver's Vision Zero staff. We talk to Boulder a lot as well, and Lakewood, among others, especially the counties in our area. So based on a lot of these reviews, we can either implement quick action projects that are things that we can do quickly with limited expense. Or if it's a bigger project that we've identified, sometimes we'll go after federal funding, and there's a lot of different safety funding available in the region as well for those types of projects. So next I want to go over the safe systems approach. And the safe systems approach is really a group of principles for how we review crashes and approach safety. And so really one of the fundamental principles is that we have to come into this assuming that people are going to make mistakes, and the punishment for those mistakes should not be death and serious injury. Our infrastructure should be forgivable enough that a mistake doesn't result in death. It also focuses on the principle that people are vulnerable, and that our vulnerable roadway users, such as pedestrians, bicyclists, people in other mobility devices, are just specifically at risk for these types of injury and fatal crashes, just because they're not protected inside a vehicle like people driving are. And so a little bit more about the safe systems approach. The safe systems approach isn't just about engineering or public works. It really involves policymakers being involved, accountability for individual road users to actually, follow the laws and do what's right, like wear seatbelts and, travel a reasonable speed. And then, as I said before, if people do make mistakes, we do want our infrastructure to be designed in a way that it's forgiving, and that, we minimize death and serious injury whenever possible. So next I'm going to get into some national crash metrics and then Colorado and Aurora crash metrics. So what we really saw over the last 30 years is that fatal crashes were on the decline a bit, but then from 2020 to now, fatal crashes have been increasing nationally, and it's been the same in Colorado and in Aurora as well. And this graphic only shows up to 2020, but 2021, 2022, and now 2023 have had the same upward trend, unfortunately. And so here are some crash metrics that we're seeing at the national level. I guess first, a really high percentage of drug and alcohol use, 56%, which is really, I think, increased since the pandemic. Lots of distracted driving, which just, nowadays with smartphones and everything that you can do with those is probably not overly surprising, but distracted driving is pretty common. And then at a national level, there's a lot of drowsy driving as well, which that's not so much something we necessarily see in Aurora, especially since we're not generally as rural. And then in Colorado, we're also seeing a very high amount of people not wearing seatbelts. And that is true in Aurora as well. So 51% of fatal crashes involve somebody who is not wearing a seatbelt in Colorado. So I wanted to touch on some just regional safety initiatives. So a lot of the patterns we're seeing are really not just Aurora focused, and it doesn't necessarily make sense for each local agency to be on their own doing their own thing, especially when our drivers and our people using the transportation network, whether it be transit or biking or walking, they normally travel as they need to in different agencies. It's not like they stay in the Aurora limits necessarily. So it really makes sense to look at these look at these trends and try to address them on a bigger level. And that's really where the Denver Regional Council of Governments, or DRCOG, as well as CDOT come in. They're very involved in kind of leading some of the larger national and regional initiatives. So some things that CDOT's done, they have had a billboard campaign where they've put up different billboards around the state about seatbelt use and seatbelt wearing to kind of get people's attention. And they've targeted these in specific areas based on, I think, crash metrics and what they're seeing. They've also put different messaging on their variable message signs, which you might have seen on their different freeways. Signs that maybe they normally use for incidents, but if there's not an incident going on, they might use that for messaging about a motorcycle crashes or fatal crashes, or not using your cell phone, things like that. Like they rotate different messages that helps get the word out. And then they also had a hearse processional downtown a few months back where they said something like, wear your seatbelt, don't end up in one of these type of things. So more of dramatic messaging, but aimed to get people's attention. So those are a lot of these initiatives were involved in giving input in, but since it's really more national, it's other of those bigger agencies that kind of take the lead on some of these bigger efforts. So now I'm going to go more into Aurora-focused trends and then projects. So in Aurora, our trends have pretty much followed pretty closely with the national trends. So from 2017 to 2019, pretty steady numbers as far as annual fatalities. The numbers for the columns in blue show total number of deaths. So it's not number of crashes necessarily, but the total number of deaths. And so it's really increased from 2020 till now. Last year, 2022, was our highest fatality rate with 50 deaths, and this year, last I looked, which I think was yesterday, we were already at 58 with 2 months to go of this year. So still very high for this year as well. I did add columns in orange that show the deaths per 100,000 population. I thought it'd just be good to show the rate, just to show that even our fatals from 2017 to 2022 doubled. Our population didn't double, our rate did increase. But I have looked at Colorado rates and national rates, and 13 deaths per 100,000 is pretty consistent with Colorado as a whole right now. And it's relatively consistent with other states as well, though there's some that are actually a lot higher. Some are lower. There's a lot of variation at that level, which probably makes sense. So these are kind of the Aurora focused numbers, and then I'll get into some patterns. So this is a compilation of 5 whole years of data. So what we're seeing here is a lot of pedestrian fatalities. So that's, again, probably not overly surprising, just because pedestrians are very vulnerable, and we have a lot of pedestrians in Aurora. So over a quarter of our fatal crashes in Aurora are pedestrians. Next, we have fixed object crashes. A fixed object is any object that you hit that isn't designed to like break away. So a lot of these fixed object crashes involve trees, other fixed objects as well. They're all grouped into one category. Approach turn crashes, so those are left turn crashes, often at intersections. And then broadsides are kind of your T-bones. And then some other crash types that are broken into smaller amounts. Bicycles are about 4%. Another vulnerable road user, probably just a little less frequently out there as pedestrians, and also they're maybe less likely to be crossing mid-block like pedestrians, but 4% of cyclists as well. Some other metrics I pulled, this is just kind of looking at our data and pulling out things that I thought were significant. So no seatbelt. In Aurora, 56 of our fatal crashes involve somebody not wearing a seatbelt. DUIs are very high, so drug and alcohol use is generally 40 to 50% of our fatal crashes. That's often hard to figure out when you're first looking at the data, because oftentimes in the original report they just don't know that information yet, and you have to wait a whole lot of months for coroner reports and investigations and documents like that. So it's very underreported, but when you start digging in, it's a very high percentage. Pedestrians and bicycles combined are about 31%. Motorcycles are a pretty high amount. Another really vulnerable road user that's going even faster than a pedestrian or bike. Intersection related crashes, just intersections tend to have a lot of conflict points, so that's a relatively high number there. And then a lot of crashes do occur at night, and so over half occur at night. So that's another metric that I pulled out as being significant. So how do we address these? This is so how we review crash patterns and try to come up with projects and strategies that will reduce specific types of crashes is something we try to have relative consistency with on a national level. So the Federal Highway Administration actually has a collection of what they call countermeasures, which are strategies that have been proven to reduce crashes. And then each countermeasure, you can click on it on their website, gives you the actual percentage that you can expect for either fatal and serious injury crashes to be reduced, or overall crashes, or sometimes there's even more detail of like this reduces this many crashes at night and things like that. So it's very great material for us. It's data driven. You know exactly how much safety you're buying for the amount of money you're spending on a project and the investment you're making. I just took a screenshot of some of the countermeasures. There's a lot more on their website, and it's actively being updated and studied. So this is a great resource. And there are some strategies that can be deployed proactively that we just incorporate and make them our new standard. So the first one on here, backplates with retroreflective material, that's something all of our new signals have. And there's a lot of other strategies that we've just rolled into our new standards and have made it so that everything new is like this. But then there's also other strategies that are areas where if we have a crash pattern like this, maybe this is a project that we could implement. So with that, I wanted to get into some of our current and planned projects that we have on the books. So first, one I'm really excited about is a safety action plan. We partnered with Adams County. They're taking the lead on this, as well as other agencies. And we are going to be doing a very comprehensive safety action plan that'll be starting off next year. It's funded by a TIP grant. And it's about a $2 million project, but it'll also help us kind of look at what's going on at a bigger level too. So not necessarily just in Aurora, but it will help us do a deep dive to all of our crash patterns and fatal crashes in Aurora as well. So that'll be an effort that's starting off next year. Probably will be a 1 to 2 year time frame on that. And so as part of that, that'll also come with a commitment to reduce fatal crashes. So a lot of the Vision Zero elements that we're talking about really will be encompassed in that upcoming safety action plan. We also recently kicked off a multimodal transportation master plan. We'll be bringing information to the TAPS committee specifically on that later on, so I won't get into it too much. But through this effort, we will be getting a lot of public feedback, which I think will be really good and will help inform future roadway standards. So a lot of what we're talking about with safety can also be incorporated into the master plan. And then we have specific design and construction projects that we've gotten from grant money as well. So right now we're rebuilding 5 traffic signals based on crash patterns and some of those approach turn types of crashes that we were seeing. So those are under construction right now. We have another highway safety improvement program, federally funded project at 11th Havana Del Mar, which we've presented here before as well. So that's a multimodal project with that it was given safety funds. We have a curb extension project in Northwest Aurora as well. And then there are multiple planned projects along Colfax Avenue with federal and state funding that are being led by CDOT as well, since we do have a pretty significant crash pattern along Colfax. And then in addition, we do have projects that are funded just using local city funds as well. And so we have, gosh, I want to say 5 roundabout projects, either just constructed or in design and construction right now. And then various councils allocated additional funding for some signal rebuild, signal reconstruction projects that are safety driven also. And then there's always other projects going on that are smaller in nature that maybe don't make it with the big, that don't have the big price tag associated with them, but we look at doing different things with pavement markings and signage on a recurring basis pretty frequently. So here's a little bit more information on some of our upcoming signal projects. So we have a signal contract that's about to go out to bid, and the signals listed at the kind of the top of this slide are all safety related signal projects. So we have the Jewel and 470 interchange, 56 in Piccadilly, 6 in Catawba, and a school related pedestrian crossing of Harvest. And then we have a bunch of other signal modification, not fully rebuild, but just signal modification projects based on safety needs at all the intersections listed here as well. And then just some completed safety projects. So we've done some of the smaller projects I've talked about that are kind of the lower cost projects we just do, include some all-way stops. So Piccadilly and Stephen D. Hogan is one of those, County Line and Powhatan. We have 2 more all-way stops we're going to do in the next month for safety related reasons as well. The project you can see on the screen here is a change that we made at 6th and, we're calling it 6th and Bison, but it's right near 6th and Harvest by Vista Peak. There was a broadside crash pattern coming out of their exit for the high school. And so we worked with the school to make that a right out only, and that's been very successful and a lot less crashes this year compared to previous years with that change. And then a lot of other projects as well, where we really try to prioritize any safety issue and put it at the top of our list as far as projects go. So next, I just wanted to touch quickly on the fiscal impact if we were to adopt Vision Zero. And Chair Marcano, I think this is something you specifically requested a few months ago, so it's something we wanted to include. So we tried to take a look at all the Vision Zero requirements and how other agencies have needed to staff up to account for those requirements with the Vision Zero program. And so based on that, we would need 3 full-time staff to run a Vision Zero program. And then with the annual reporting and updating of the safety action plan and those types of requirements, that adds cost as well. And then there would also need to be annual funding to actually implement projects. So on a total, we estimate that on the low side, as a minimum, we'd need about $2.4 million per year if we were to adopt a Vision Zero program, and that would be a recurring expense. So that is all I had. And with that, I will open it up for any questions that you have.
All right. Thank you, Carly, for that presentation. So I'll hand it off to Councilor Medina first.
Yeah, thank you, Carly, for the presentation. Yeah, just a couple things, I guess, since that we've had an uptick in the amount. Have you seen patterns of specific areas that most of those are occurring, or is it just kind of spread out?
That's a good question. I think there are some patterns with areas. I would say Colfax, a lot of pedestrian crashes on Colfax. That's probably the main sustained pattern over time that we've seen. And that's consistent with what Denver is seeing on Colfax and Lakewood. And we're working with them as well as CDOT on maybe some different strategies to address some of that. I showed a heat map a few slides back, maybe towards the beginning.
I was going to ask if you could pop that back up.
Yeah, I can flip back to that. I didn't want to make you all dizzy, but here you go. So this isn't just fatals, this is all crashes. So, and what we're talking about now is more like fatal and serious injuries, but we do see kind of more crash patterns really in the northwest part of the city. And I think in that area of the city, people are less likely to have automobiles and they're more likely to be walking or using transit. Colfax and Havana are our highest transit corridors, so that kind of makes sense. But a lot of times fatal crashes also seem, some of them are kind of random in nature as far as where they occur. So it's not that we don't have any fatal crashes in other parts of the city, but when you're looking at the data over a longer time period, that kind of is what bubbles up, I think. And we'll definitely do a much more deep dive into this when we do our safety action plan. So, and we'll have a list of defined projects and takeaways from that as well.
And to piggyback on that safety piece, is there a pattern of that as well? Is there like, I saw some statistics, is there specifics in the sense of, is it just speeding in general, or is it just use of drugs?
I think there's a lot of different patterns. It makes it kind of hard to pinpoint the exact cause. Definitely speeding, I think, has been up since 2020. It's a little interesting that fatal crashes spiked in 2020 because people weren't driving as much that year. And I think it's because in that year, especially, the roads were wide open and it was easier to speed really in 2020 and maybe 2021 as well. But we see, I think with fatal crashes, we see a lot of motorcycles corresponding to kind of also good weather months. We see definitely a lot of pedestrian crashes with people crossing mid-block on 6-lane arterials. And then the lack of seatbelts. It's a lot of times it's more than one factor. So what I see a lot is the speeding coupled with no seatbelt, where if it was just speeding, the person would have survived. But if you're speeding and you crash and you're not wearing a seatbelt, it's obviously going to be more severe. So oftentimes it's more than one factor involved in these crashes, I would say.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Councilor Medina. And Carly, so I've got a couple of questions for you. So, you included the costs for what a Vision Zero program would look like, which I appreciate. But I also want to know, like, what are the benefits that we derive from that, right? Because my understanding is that you'd get access to different grant funding sources and things like that. So could you elaborate a little bit about that?
Yeah, and that's a good question too. So the benefits would hopefully be that you decrease crashes, but I think the hard part about Vision Zero is the agencies that have adopted it really haven't seen that benefit be actionable at this point. And it's not because of their program, it's really just the regional trends, and you can't fully fix everything and redesign roads and change driver behavior by throwing an amount of money and full-time staff at the issue. So I think the hard part with adopting Vision Zero is you're committing to this goal to reduce crashes by a certain amount by a certain time frame, and that's really not what we've seen other agencies be able to achieve. But as far as other benefits with applying for grant funding, we've actually still been eligible to apply for grant funding because we're in the DRCOG region, and DRCOG was one of the agencies that adopted Vision Zero. So we haven't been excluded from any of the safety grants. So we've actually been actively applying to a lot of the safety grants and have a lot of safety grants on the books right now with projects that we have funding for design and construction for, which is honestly a good thing and has been really helpful that DRCOG was able to do that.
Yeah. I guess following up on that point, I'm glad that we're able to do that as a member of DRCOG. Would pursuing our own plan and commitment, make it more likely that we receive this funding or open up a different tranche potentially, in addition to maybe something that we could get from DRCOG? I guess from your perspective, or is that how the program would work?
I think that's really the goal of the safety action plan that we're doing, and a big part of why we wanted to do that. I think that'll give us a good, comprehensive list of projects and, all different, I guess, approaches to safety will be included in that. And I think that having that as an Aurora plan that will come to council, I'm sure when it's getting adopted as well, I think that will help us be more competitive for future grants. But we've been pretty successful with being awarded these safety grants. I can't remember any that we applied for on the safety side and haven't gotten. And CDOT's been very supportive as well. I think just given a lot of the areas where we're seeing patterns are on state highways like Colfax and Havana, among others. So CDOT has been a great resource, and they've been very supportive in funding our projects as well. So I don't know that adopting Vision Zero by itself would make us more competitive, but I do think having that action plan in place will make us more competitive.
Okay, I appreciate that. On one of the points you brought up around distracted driving, do we know how billboards and other kinds of roadside advertisements impact that? I know that we currently don't allow that in the city of Aurora, but I do know that there's a proposal floating around that would kind of open that door. So I just want to know if we have information specific to that.
I don't think we do. It's really hard to quantify distracted driving anyways, because people aren't necessarily going to admit to being distracted. I think with the higher severity crashes, what I've seen in the police reports is that they see that there was an active cell phone with a certain app on it or something and know that it was distracted driving, or there's witnesses. But as far as data on if, billboards are distracting or not, I am not sure, but I honestly haven't done a whole lot of research on that topic. I'm sure other agencies, like, I don't know, I'm just thinking Las Vegas, I had a peer exchange with them recently. They might have more information on that if we need to look into that in the future.
Okay. Yeah, I would just like to know if we can find some more information, especially as that other conversation is, moving through the process. But I don't want us to inadvertently make a decision that might benefit the city financially, but then, be a net loss for our residents in terms of danger on the road. So,
Yeah,
um,
that makes sense.
yeah. So one of the other things I wanted to touch a little on here were, but yeah, the fact that, most of our incidences seem to happen at intersections, but like it's almost, I think 40%, if I'm not mistaken, per Dr. Cog happen on straightaways. And I think if we look at our own, heat map for where we're having traffic incidences, it's mostly along Colfax and Havana, like you said, and then 225, which is not to, nothing surprising there, just given how people drive on the highway. But yeah, so I'm really concerned about not just, making our intersections safer, but what can we do to make our arterials safer, right? And then that's a challenge because we've kind of designed them for speed, with the assumption that speed would allow us to have more capacity, but I feel like it's ultimately resulted in a more dangerous road network. And I think that there are safer ways to move people. So can we talk about that a little?
Yeah, definitely. And just to clarify that some of the intersection metrics, a crash could be coded as at intersection even if there's not a signal or a roundabout. So some of our crashes, if it's a pedestrian crossing at an unsignalized intersection, like Iliff or Chambers or something, but there's technically another road there, that would be categorized at an intersection. But as far as pedestrian safety across arterials, I think it's a really tough thing to solve, because even if we put in a signalized crossing or a bridge or an underpass, people aren't likely to go out of their way to use those elements. And we've seen crashes. We had I think a double pedestrian fatal crash on Colfax right below the Ped Bridge, maybe earlier this year or last year, for example. And I think people generally take the path of least resistance, and that makes it really difficult. Because you see a crash happen and you think like, oh, what can we do about this? Can we put a signal here? But a lot of the crashes I see that are at intersections, people aren't pushing the button. They're crossing Peoria at a signal and they're not even pushing the button. So one thing we're looking at, and we've been working with Lakewood on this as well, it's something that they've really been spearheading, is maybe there's a type of detection system we can use to alert drivers there might be a pedestrian in the road, instead of expecting the pedestrian to go out of their way, or something to kind of accept that maybe in the area of Colfax, I mean, it's not appropriate everywhere, that maybe there's some way we need to just alert drivers better so that they can, know that and make informed decisions and kind of be on alert, instead of thinking that people are going to walk a quarter mile and go up a bridge on Colfax at least. But it really depends on the area, and all areas are different. So we really try to look at the overall context before, proposing millions of dollars of projects that might not help. So.
Yeah. I mean, just on the way to City Hall yesterday, there were a couple of kids, if I had to guess, they were probably, Gateway High School students, who were crossing Chambers, and they were just dancing in the median, basically the raised median, just to the south of Mexico. So yeah, folks are going to want to cross, where it's convenient to them based off of where they're going, right? And I think that, kind of just like we do with desire trails, in undeveloped areas where that we typically will try to build a bike path or a sidewalk there. If we're serious about making the city safer for folks, we should add crossings where people are wanting to cross. Because I don't think that just us telling them not to is going to change anything. I mean, clearly it doesn't, right? They'll do it without any infrastructure, and when people are doing probably 55 miles an hour in a 40.
Yeah.
So I know that there's always concerns about, well, how does that impact traffic flow, right? But it's like traffic is gonna, people are gonna drive and get around how they can, but I feel like we need to be keeping folks who are the most vulnerable users, which in this case are going to be our pedestrians, right, safe.
And
So
CDOT does have a couple planned projects for crossings along Colfax, and we're looking at that also with the BRT project, which it's in my mind. I have another presentation and 2 presentations from now on that, but we're trying to look at that holistically too, because it's tough with the bus stops when you get people just running across and not pushing a button to catch a bus. So there's a lot of factors at play, but that's definitely a good point. And I agree, we need to look at where people want to cross and not just where it's convenient for us to allow them to.
exactly, yeah, it's, kind of goes back to what I've kind of ranted about in the past, where I think we need to prioritize safety as opposed to speed and convenience for motorists in this case, because it's going to make it less safe for everybody involved if we don't, especially as we continue to grow as a city. And then, yeah, just an officer. No, actually, that's not even really relevant. And I guess I wanted to circle back to Vision Zero then, because one of the things that you mentioned, and this is, I know that this is true, that there's a lot of cities across the country that have adopted Vision Zero, but nevertheless, the trends continue in the wrong direction. And one of the things that I have read about that phenomenon is that, well, folks will sign on to it, they'll resolve to it, they'll study the problems and, issue those reports. So they do a good job of admiring the problem that they have with their infrastructure, but then they don't actually make the investments to correct the course, right? And it sounds like we're already making some of those investments without necessarily being a part of Vision Zero. But I guess, could you talk a little more about what you've seen in other jurisdictions? As I know that you attend like conventions and you talk to other planners and things like that. So could you share with us your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think, at least we talked to Denver a lot because obviously they're very close by and they're a large agency with a lot of resources and they have FTEs dedicated to Vision Zero. And from what I see, they do have money allocated to actually implementing projects. I think it's just it's a system-wide thing. We can't, none of us are going to have enough money to completely rebuild all the roads in the city. And when we're seeing fatal crash patterns, the locations really do tend to be kind of random in nature. So a lot of them are just not something that lend themselves to be easily addressable by like a public works project. A lot of what we're seeing, for example, on Colfax, like it's more mental health issues and there's maybe other factors at play or other services that are needed or other strategies that aren't in the toolbox. I think all of us are really good at implementing the toolbox, but I think when you start really drilling into the details and talking to the police officers, like there's just so many factors at play that it's not an easy thing to address. If it was easy, all of us would have figured it out by now. But it's also just, we have thousands of lane miles in the city, and anything we do in one hotspot location, we don't have the money to do it everywhere. So we'll address one hotspot and maybe that location is safer, but it's a block away, you have a very similar condition. So I think it's just a bigger than any one agency has been able to kind of fully wrap their hands around and get addressed. And the trends are changing too. I mean, 2020 to now, things have changed a lot. It takes us a long time to even get the crash data, then to analyze it and to implement a project is normally a few-year time period. So even from 2020, which is some ways an anomaly year, to now, I mean, it's just a very, very difficult thing to be proactive on and stay ahead of when the trends are constantly changing. So that was a lot. I don't know if I fully answered that. Hopefully that made some kind of sense.
I found that helpful. Thank you. I mean, and one of the things that I wanted that really stood out to what you said is the mental health component of this, or like really just like the public health component in general. Because when I'm looking at Vision Zero and some, well, that same program, but like in other countries, like they actually are in a lot of cities moving in the right direction. But then when you talk about the public health component, well, these places also have like much better access to mental health resources, behavioral health resources, et cetera. And then they have generally speaking, I think a much more human scale kind of built environment than we do in a lot of these cities as well. So I think those things certainly compound, but yeah, so I guess we need federal help in more than just infrastructure, hard infrastructure dollars, right? Might need some help with some other parts of public policy that are not necessarily directly within our wheelhouse as a municipality, but certainly influence everything else or impact everything that we do.
Yeah,
So-
that's why we try to really participate in some of those regional meetings, and we've had different meetings with health professionals as well. And it's just good to kind of let them know what we're seeing and to get it on their radar also. But yeah, as a local agency, a lot of it isn't necessarily in, exactly in our wheelhouse to address, but I know there are bigger efforts going on related to that as well.
Yeah, and I mean, there's a lot of intersectionality, so I'm hoping that those conversations are taking place. So, all right, cool. Well, thank you for the presentation. You've given me a bunch to think about here. I'm excited to know that we are making progress despite not having, signed on to Vision Zero ourselves as a municipality, that we still have access to a lot of these resources. And I just want to thank you again for highlighting the roundabouts. That is something that I will
No
never give up.
problem.
So
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you.
thank you. All righty. So anything else, Councilor Medina, or are we good on that one? All right, fantastic. All righty, so let's move on to 4C. So it's going to be fiber and micro trenching. So I'm excited to talk about this one. Looks like Haley, you've got the floor.
Hi there. Yeah, I'll go ahead and share my screen. So that's showing correctly and everyone can hear me?
Yep, we can hear you just fine.
Okay, good. It's a long pause. I was like, oh no. Okay, good afternoon, Chair Marcano and council members Lawson and Medina. My name is Haley Johansson. I'm the city engineer in Public Works in the Development Review Division. With me today supporting the fiber program are Leslie Gaylord, who's the project manager for the telecommunications program, and Brianna Medina for the development review manager. Today, we're going to provide information on the city's fiber optic program and the evaluation of the micro trenching method for installation. This is an informational presentation on the program, which was requested by Chair Marcano. So our agenda today includes an overview of what fiber is, as well as where and how fiber is installed in the city. Additionally, we'll cover how fiber is permitted, and we'll provide information on the micro trenching installation method and what it is. At the end, we'll go over our current and next steps, and we can answer any questions at that time. Excuse me. So fiber optic is a method of transmitting information optically. Prior to fiber optic technology, information was transmitted via electric cabling. The infrastructure transmits voice, video, telemetry, and data. And fiber optic provides a higher bandwidth, which supports higher internet usage and streaming. The fiber optic infrastructure also supports internet for residents and businesses, the city's traffic signals, and then a number of other city departments can benefit from fiber installations as well. Fiber companies request to install infrastructure in the city right of way. So traditional fiber installations are typically a board method at a minimum depth of 30 inches. Some installations may include some trenching, which is an open cut from the surface of the roadway. During development review, the city requires fiber conduit to be placed for future installations to support city functions. So the city can request during development projects that additional conduits be placed for during new or modified traffic signals, when there's new roadways or roadway widening projects. And then, so fiber companies apply to be in the city. And so the city enters into agreements and provides permits to companies to allow for fiber installation. These agreements include public improvement permits for work within the right-of-way, master license agreements between the city and the fiber company. And then we also review fiber plan sets, and those are similar to our civil plan sets that we review in development review. Fiber applications are required to adhere to our current city code and criteria. In 2022, the city developed the fiber optic standard operating procedure guidance document. And this document generally provides consolidated guidance on the city's most relevant code and criteria for fiber installs. For that initiative, public outreach to the fiber community was completed, and feedback was incorporated into that document. Another thing to note about telecommunications permitting is that if we allow something for one fiber company, we need to allow that for all fiber companies. And so that's part of the, that fiber companies must be treated fairly and equally. So then a couple of years ago, the city received a proposal for a microtrenching installation. This method of installation differs from traditional fiber by cutting a 1 to 2 inch wide section in the pavement, about 10 to 24 inches deep, laying the fiber optic line within that cut, and then backfilling with a proprietary mix of materials and sealant and chemical additives. The benefits to microtrenching installation can include less surface disturbance, fewer utility conflicts, faster build, and if the city requests, some companies may agree to install a second line for city use. And that incremental cost, if we request it, would be an expense to the city. There's a couple of example pictures on this slide. The left-hand photo is an initial installation of microtrenching in the metro area across a concrete sidewalk. And to the right is just a stock photo of an in-process installation. So then city staff evaluated both the benefits and the concerns related to microtrenching. This slide shows example pictures within the metro area of installations. So the left-hand picture is the same location from the previous slide, and it shows after a period of time, and it shows the concrete tape filler deteriorated and removed. And it was reported that this condition was in disrepair for months, so it wasn't quickly repaired. And then the right-hand picture shows an installation in a pavement section, also after a period of time, and you can see there's a little deterioration of that proprietary sealant at the top. So the concerns identified with microtrenching includes the long-term pavement integrity. Our local street sections have smaller pavement depth and are below the minimum pavement condition. And so this could impact the pavement condition, and then it could impact the longevity of the Build Up Aurora program. Some concerns that we hear from residents is restoration of disturbed areas, and usually this occurs when there's disturbance to the front yard or their sidewalks. We've also heard from another jurisdiction that during mill and overlay efforts that they had for pavement restoration, that the broken microtrench lines needed a full replacement. They couldn't be spliced, and that causes some additional disruption. And on the picture with the concrete sidewalk, you can see that this would allow for water infiltration, and that could increase the potential in concrete sidewalks for heaving and potentially trip hazards. We also requested pricing when this proposal came in, and so the company that was proposing to do microtrenching had presented some information. It didn't appear to translate to more affordable internet at that time. It was indicated that the internet package for the microtrenching company was $89 a month versus a traditional install company. The packages were $60 a month, and that was evaluated in June of 2022. And then one of the last concerns identified was that because of the installation type in the roadway, it can be difficult to assign the deterioration or the maintenance obligations to micro trenching, whereas traditional installations have very well-defined limits. And due to federal regulations, full travel lane width, even due to damage by microtrenching, is not the obligation of the company to replace, and that leaves the city on the hook to fund and complete that maintenance. So to recap, based on the information that was presented in the evaluation of the proposal, which was across multiple divisions and departments in the city, staff did not recommend and does not recommend microtrenching at this time due to the concerns identified. And fiber companies can continue to install fiber infrastructure in accordance with current city code and criteria. So they're not limited in terms of being able to install fiber at this time as well. And that's the presentation. Thank you for your time, and please let us know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Haley, for the presentation. We'll go ahead and recognize Councilor Medina first for any questions or comments.
Thank you, Haley. So in my neighborhood, we recently had some cable coming through, and I'm assuming it's fiber. So was that through the city? Was that passed through the city to do that? Because I'm not sure if they did micro trenching or what, but they dug up a pretty good swath in my backyard.
I'll have Leslie respond to that, since she manages the telecommunications and the permitting associated with it.
Thank you very much for that question. And I apologize, I am having a slight hard time hearing you, so I'm just going to repeat what I think I heard. And if I didn't hear it correctly, please let me know. That you had a cable company and they installed in your backyard?
Correct.
Okay. So I would just request that if you could send me your address, that way I could look up on permit to see who that company was that accessed that easement. And then what is your question or concern that you have for that?
I guess my question is just, did they use that? I'm not sure if they used that same method there, or they just pulled it through, dug a hole, pulled it through somehow. I'm not really sure on that, because I know from the easement, they moved it from where your current or what originally was and moved it to the end of my fence from one end to the other for what reason. They went through our whole neighborhood basically. So every neighborhood here had that pulled in there, because they also broke one of my sprinklers as well, because it was right next to the new outlet, which I had, flagged, but apparently they just piled everything on top of it regardless. So I was just curious about, is that what they're doing? Is it a specific company?
Yes, so they are allowed to use utility easements. That is one of the ways, because fiber, as we all know, after 2020, became a necessity, a need, because we took that utility that was normally found in public services, libraries, schools, and we had to integrate to support those home measures, whether it was working or students, whatever it might be. So in order to make that a cohesive, integrated system, more of like a blanketed service, the companies have had to expand what those installs look like, especially into neighborhoods and communities that originally were relying on towered services. So what we are asking for, and also not to diminish the roads and how things are placed, is that the other opportunities they have is to utilize easements. And inside the fiber SOP, it does instruct, and we have requested and asked that they inform the homeowners. So what we can do is look into your situation specifically and follow up directly from our inspections portion of the city, and then also find the company, which one it was, and if they were doing a pull through or a bore installation. But I'll get back to you on that one on a side note, and we can just move that one to the side. But that is all found with inside the fiber SOP for the companies, and then also their subcontractors of what those conditions that we ask for install and communication that we want them to have with our citizens.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have.
All right,
Thank you.
Medina. So I do have a couple of questions. So on the cons slide, if we can go back, maybe just one here. No, next one. There we go. I understand that some other jurisdictions have run into some issues, especially with the mill and overlay process. When I had talked to folks about this, there were like two methods that were basically kind of proposed to us. One of them was like a very shallow one, which is like a 2-inch cut, something like that, and that's the one that would be impacted by mill and overlay. And frankly, like that one, I still didn't quite understand because I flat out asked one of the providers, like, how does this make any sense for you? Because you're going to have to come out and do repairs anytime we have to repair the road. They're like, oh, well, it doesn't happen often enough. And, maybe I think, and they thought they could, I guess, absorb the cost. Basically, the course of splicing or repairing there was less than, it would be to just like do it the traditional way, right? So I thought that was a very strange answer. But, I do think that that method is not ideal for the reasons you all have already outlined. However, the deeper method, I want to know a little more about that and what the issues are with it, because that, you are well below the like road surface at that point. And it doesn't seem like it should be impacted at all by regular just mill and overlay to have, that deeper, the conduit run more deeply, I guess. And I do see that there's a potential benefit there for the city as well, because I know part of our own plan is to run our own fiber network. And whenever we are tearing up our roads, that's something that we're already doing, is putting in our own fiber to connect city facilities and infrastructure. So can we talk a little about the differences between those two, and why would we not support the latter?
So I will pass that over to Brianna and Haley to have that discussion with you.
Actually, if I could, this is Cindy. Lynn Center is on the call. And given that we've been intimately involved with the Build Up Aurora program, and we can explain what we've found in neighborhoods, let's start there, if that's okay, Councilmember Marcano.
Sure. Yep. Can y'all hear me?
Yes. Lynn,
Okay,
are you on? You might be muted. Okay. Well, when Lynn is able to join us. So what we've found.
I'm sorry, Cindy.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah.
I had a panic moment.
Sorry.
And was trying to get things all situated, and then screens went haywire on me. So I apologize for the delay, and let me get my camera started. So what we have seen a lot in the Build Up Aurora areas, and actually I kind of did expect to see this, is our neighborhood streets are very thin. So they were very often milling. We generally try to mill 2 to 2.5 inches, and even at that depth, we're into dirt already. And as any of you who've listened to any of my presentations on pavement maintenance know, the concrete and the pavement sections overall are very, very deteriorated. The biggest concern that we have with either method is that it is basically creating a very long longitudinal crack in the roadway that has to be maintained somehow. And this, I have to say, this picture that I think Cindy took this, but this picture looks a lot like my neighborhood, because Centennial came through my neighborhood. And they finished work in August, and already, so less than 2 months later, their crack sealant looks exactly like this. It's all cracked. And what we're seeing in my neighborhood, and what we've heard from other jurisdictions, is that when it is placed in a roadway such as the one pictured, that the alligator cracking that's already in the pavement continues then across the sealant and then compromises that. And once, as you see in this one, there's a crack right down the middle. That's going to allow water in. And then once water gets in there, we have our lovely freeze-thaw cycle. Getting things down below the frost line is a great idea, but quite often it doesn't happen. And so the fiber actually can creep up into the trench and out of the surface based on some of the research that we did. Cindy, I don't know if that's what you wanted.
Yeah, I think a little of that, and also why we require Haley and Carly, probably others, and Leslie, the 30-inch minimum. And then I wanted to add, before we get to that, one more item. We did, Laura and I did meet with another fiber company interested in the city, and they actually use the standard method of installation that would meet our roadway criteria. So Haley, Leslie, I'm not sure who wants to take the 30-inch minimum.
So I can answer part of that. With that, the 30-inch depth and utility requirement, it is also easier when it comes to utility call out and other installation. And when we have other city infrastructure projects and expansion projects or improvements, we know where to find those utilities, and there's not as much disruption to launch those programs. The other portion with that is we also have 19 other master licenses with multiple fiber companies that currently hold the standard for boring and installing with the city. So it's not such an archaic method that we are halting the process of being able to provide those services, or that we are currently not able to offer expansion on those services. Micro trenching is one of those that, if it were to come and you're looking at the bore depths and I don't even want to say just the minimum standard, it takes away the review process for Aurora Water and other utilities, because those depths aren't going to be crossed for the Sioux law. So that is also something we have to consider when we're looking at other infrastructures that it could impact and could possibly cause damage to by having water and other freeze thaw theories happen by not having protected utilities because of those cuts.
Okay. No, I appreciate that. And I guess part of the concern ultimately is like, well, what about the damage? Who's liable for it, right? And I think one of the points that was in here was that the maintenance or the cost of repair still fell back on the city and some of these other jurisdictions. And I'm just wondering, like, is that not something that could be basically worked into an agreement where, like, if this doesn't come out as proposed, since this technology is still like, fairly new and the approach is fairly novel, like, you being the company, not the not the municipality, like are responsible for 100% of the cost of any kind of repairs that we have to go back in and do then. Is that not something that could be worked into that kind of an agreement?
So there's a couple pieces here related to that. And one of them is, number one, we would have to establish the standards and criteria to be included in our roadway manual. And we do not have the because this would be a new installation type. So we would have to develop the criteria and the requirements. Then we'd have to develop the plan submittal requirements. And then also, to your point, include where the liability lays for the damage. This also, though, would really impact our inspections group and require additional FTEs and inspectors to keep up with this process. So it's impactful not only from the roadway maintenance liability, but also from the staffing and resourcing component. And for me, I'm concerned, obviously, about the pavement integrity, as we've talked about, but also workload impacts. We're running full bore not to be a pun, not a pun, no pun intended, but we're running full bore on our inspections across the city, and we are very challenged to even be able to inspect some of the utility work going on right now. So
Understood. And, I appreciate all of those concerns. I think those are all valid concerns. I guess what I wanted to circle back to was we'd have to create an SOP, right? And you have to have staffing to, time, number one, to do that, then staffing for inspections and all that. And I think that those are all things that I would obviously want to support y'all in being able to do. But from my perspective, the issue here is that, we had another provider, Ting, right, who wanted to come into Aurora, and they couldn't afford to do it. So they backed out. So we're all stuck with Comcast. And I'm sure I don't really care who's watching, but I pay $130-ish a month for, fiber that is advertised at 1 gigabit, but it really comes in at like 500 or 400 megabits per second. We're at a competitive disadvantage in terms of our broadband offerings here because Comcast effectively has a monopoly. CenturyLink's technology is not sophisticated enough to offer anything close. So from my perspective, if there's someone who's willing to come in here, assume liability, but I mean complete liability for anything that goes wrong, and they still say that they can hit a $70 price point for gigabit internet across the city, I'm really interested in that. And it's not just me. That's something that I hear from a lot of my constituents. I've had folks begging us for municipal broadband since before I ran for office, right? And this is, from what I see, as an opportunity to be able to do, something like that. So I understand all the concerns you have, and I want to be clear, like, I'm not completely sold on this yet, but I want to see, like, if it has any kind of, feasibility in the city. I understand that there are issues that we've run into, or that this, how this process has run into in other jurisdictions. But my understanding is also that the methods are changing and improving. So, and if I'm not mistaken, Lakewood, right, is the most recent city in the metro that's kind of started allowing this to happen. And I'm assuming
Yes.
that's where some of the issues are coming from as well, right?
Yes and no.
Okay.
To
Can you
be
say more
very
about that?
transparent with
Yeah.
you, they've also allowed micro trenching with the installation and caveat that one of their companies is installing on that behalf. So when we first started the presentation, so different municipalities can offer different opportunities of how those installations happen. And our comparable would be the size of Colorado Springs. However, Colorado Springs does not allow anyone outside of the city-owned utility to install their utilities. So they hire the city to install fiber. Lakewood has agreed to allow micro trenching and rapid connect, which is that 2-inch, not even sustainable layer that wouldn't be constantly replaced.
Gotcha.
So when you're looking at something of the magnitude, it also goes into the aspects of what are the standards that the city has created for those installers to follow. So we have a fiber SOP and a roadway manual and different steps and procedures of how we request those installations to happen. But also to understand, we are one of only 2 other cities of our size that have those exact same standards to follow in those procedures. Lakewood doesn't have those same standards and procedures of how they go and review those submittals. So I don't want to give you false hope and narrative of saying that they've already agreed to sign it. They've agreed to sign it without having the same formidable backbone that we have for other installations and all of those requirements to be treated the same. So I would say it would almost be a better comparison to compare with the fact of what is being installed, because we also have the undergrounding ordinance and a 1% project that we also have to back. When we're looking at having something such as micro trenching, and I completely hear when it comes to competitive cost and being able to offer all the same opportunity of affordable as well as feasible broadband, some of that also relies on the fact of that aerial feed and cleanup that we're still trying to do. So we don't want to just throw more aerial and other opportunities that is not going to enhance that portion, but could end up costing more because of the infrastructure that we have to intrude by placing other vertical assets to hold it until they're able to get into some of those areas and function. Because in the areas that we have vertical asset, where they would have to micro trench or have this temporary installation, we would not have it because the easements are strung not always in the front of yards, but in those backyards. So we're still going to have some of those same harder discussions. I just want to give you full transparency of when we started this discussion for micro trenching, rapid connect, all of these different procedures, it was also looking at the impact that we would have to also impose on the citizens to have that installation.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. And, you know, just to be clear, I don't want us to like kind of weaken any of our standards or anything like that. And when we're talking about, you know, the vertical infrastructure, that's more along the line of with like what Crown Castle does, right? With their 4G, 5G towers. Am I correct in that?
Small cell and fiber are two separate animals, but what I'm saying more on the aspects of the aerial, like you had expressed with Comcast, Xfinity, CenturyLink, the proprietary users versus allowing something and someone new to come in. That's why we have the traditional access of bore for those installations. So we're not putting more weight on those aerial fiber feeds because the easements for original Aurora is in backyards on those aerial feeds.
Mm-hmm. No, that makes sense. And I think that part of the reason this, you know, the micro trenching approach has even really gained steam is because you kind of get around some of those older regulations that, you know, the Comcast of the world, for example, have used to keep some of these other newer internet only providers basically from being able to even utilize existing infrastructure in those easements. So I think that they you know, because they're also they're considered full-on communications companies. So I think that they get regulated differently than just like fiber, you know, companies would, if I'm not mistaken. So is that correct, Leslie? I think I saw you shake your head. Sorry. I just want to make sure I'm not off base.
No, it's not that I'm disagreeing. Everyone has the same opportunity. It is the obligation of fair and equal access that we offer to everyone. So whether you are CenturyLink, Comcast, Zayo, all of the other companies, we offer the exact same process of installation for all of those companies. It is how they pursue those installations and opportunities back to the citizens. And we fully do understand where Ting and some of these other companies are coming with being able to circumcede, but they have the exact same opportunities. So all of the other companies still bore and still make connection to the citizens. It is just a cheaper cost on the company because they can go 1,000 linear feet in an hour in micro trenching. And so that's what Cindy was trying to explain is the impact of all of that is not just FTEs for inspection, but it's to also go back to reviewing the plan sets, being able to force streets, inspections, so many different pieces of that. So when you look at that as a linear feed, what they're offering to the communities is a suggestion, because it's not a guarantee that just because we say yes and we'll allow them to go in as a micro trench installation, we still don't have the same guarantee that that service is going to be offered to all of the citizens. It's just going to change the method of installation and the impact of how that installation is going to be fed to the citizen.
So
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry.
Oh, I was just gonna say, so if this would work for the committee, we could reach out to Lakewood and get some understanding of what the impacts they've seen. I took a look. It looks like they authorized it about earlier this year or late last year. So If this would work, Chair Marcano, we could reach out to Lakewood, get some understanding. I know Greenwood Village doesn't allow micro trenching, and that's recent as well. So perhaps we could do a little outreach to some of the communities that have been approached and the decisions that they've made and why. And if they were able to get the liability back for maintenance and repair, if they considered that.
Yeah, no, I would appreciate that because, you know, as I said, when I was approached about this idea, you know, it's something that is very exciting just as a avid internet user myself, but also something that so many of our constituents really, really want. They want other options. And they're dissatisfied, generally speaking, with the, you know, basically communications monopoly that we're dealing with in the city. So, yeah.
Let us do that then.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And yeah, thank you all for the presentation. It's been informative, and I'm hoping that we can maybe find ways to protect our residents, obviously protect our infrastructure, but allow for, you know, more options in the city. So, all right, thank you all. And finally, we're on to 4D. So that is consideration to approve a resolution for an intergovernmental agreement between the city of Aurora and the city and county of Denver for the Colfax Bus Rapid Transit Project construction phase. Yay, BRT. Carly, you're back on the floor.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Chair Marcano. It is me again, Carly Camposano, Traffic Manager with the Public Works Department. This item is to approve a resolution for an IGA between the City and County of Denver and the City of Aurora for the Colfax Bus Rapid Transit or BRT project. And this is for the construction phase. So we already had an IGA that we brought forward last year for the design phase. So you've heard a lot of this information already. And this is just for the construction phase that goes along with that. So I'll give a few updates as part of this presentation. So I have a couple slides just of overviews of the BRT project since it's been a few months at least since this has come to council. So the Colfax BRT project is a regional project that involves City and County of Denver is really taking the lead on the project. Aurora, we're pretty heavily involved at this point, as well as CDOT and RTD. And this map shows the limits of the Colfax BRT project. So you have the area in yellow in the downtown section and connecting downtown Union Station and Civic Center, which is about 1.4 miles. Then you have the blue section, which is really in the Denver city limits. And that's the area where the BRT will be center running with dedicated lanes in the Denver section. And then we have the Aurora section, which is about 3 miles from Yosemite to I-225. And in that area, the BRT will be side running mixed flow with traffic, but there are various enhancements included in the Aurora section that I'll talk about a little bit. So overall, the corridor is over 9 miles in length and really connects our line and I-225 interchange with the downtown Union Station area and follows the current 15 and 15L routes. So this project has been under study, planning, and design for over 10 years now, and Aurora has been a stakeholder throughout this process and a lot of different milestones. So I won't go over all of this, but just it's been a very long, evolved process, and we're finally getting to the end where we're going to see a project be implemented and construction will start next year, which is really exciting. But the project really gained speed in 2020 through 2022 when Denver initiated the environmental clearance and initial preliminary design process, which is the NEPA process. And there's been a lot of different community outreach touch points as well too, and here in Aurora as well in the last couple of years. So just as a refresher of what BRT elements are and what we're going to see in Aurora. So in order for a line to be considered BRT, there are certain minimum requirements that are really required as part of the Federal Transit Administration or the FTA's definition of BRT. And so these types of elements include having shelters, benches, trash receptacles, lit maps with schedule displays, and branding in order to be considered a BRT line. So at a minimum, all of those enhancements are included at all of the stations in Aurora as well as in Denver. And so back last year, what we brought forward to council were staff recommendations of additional enhancements beyond the minimum requirements that we had proposed within Aurora. And so we took a pretty detailed list on the staff level in Aurora with all the different options along with Denver, and developed some recommendations that were then approved by council last year. And so some elements that are going to be included in the Aurora section are signature stations at the 2 Havana stations in both directions. So we'll have a signature station that's similar in aesthetics to some of the enhanced Denver stations. We're trying to include other elements such as ticket vending machines, variable message signs, emergency phones and security cameras. And then we've also identified specific areas for level boarding as well that we went through. I think I want to say mid last year, we brought the specific recommendations to council. So based on those recommendations, we came up with a funding plan that also went to council last year. And so this slide shows the overall funding plan for the entire project. So this project is being funded significantly by a large FTA grant. That it's a small starts grant, and Denver and RTD have been very active in pursuing this grant, and that will include about $127 million worth of funding. And then Denver had some different bond initiatives that allowed them to dedicate large amounts of their local match as well. There's a Dr. Cog TIP grant that is covering part of the match. And then in our last funding strategy we brought forward, it's planned that the city of Aurora will contribute about $14 million total. And so that total is for design and construction. So the design IGA went through council and was executed last year. And through that, we allocated $2.3 million for the project to take us through design. And design is still going on right now, and we'll finish up early next year. So design has been coming a long way recently. And then this IGA is just for the construction portion. And this is the same, these are pretty much the same numbers that we presented previously. But the construction is expected to begin mid next year on the project. And the Aurora amount will be $11.7 million. And that includes funding for the work that will be done in Aurora. So Denver can't spend their own local money outside of their city limits. So this money is what is needed to include some of those elements that we had accounted for beyond the minimum within Aurora. And I think the really good part about participating in this regional project in this grant is that we're then also benefiting from the grant funding. So part of the FTA grant will cover about half of the costs in Aurora as well. So by contributing this $14 million, we're actually getting almost $28 million worth of infrastructure upgrades in the Aurora section. So this project timeline just shows where we're at right now and where we're going. So final design is right now 2023 to 2024. And then 2024 to 2025 is really when the small starts grant application process is finalized. And so this funding, this IGA is just for construction funding, as I mentioned. And then I think groundbreaking is planned to be mid next year, with a lot of the heavy construction occurring after that. And the construction in Aurora might not necessarily start next year. It's a big project, and the contractor is currently working on how best to phase it. But groundbreaking will be soon, and then revenue service in 2028. So with that, the question for the committee is if you support moving this IGA forward to the next available study session. And I can answer any questions.
All right. Thank you, Carly, for the presentation. Councilor Medina, do you have any questions?
None for me. I'm glad to see it moving.
And likewise, heck yeah, buses.
Yes.
All righty. So with that, we'll move on to miscellaneous matters. I don't see any. Are there any from staff or from Councilor Medina?
None for me, thank you.
Okay. Anticipated topics for our November meeting.
Yep, thanks, Chair Marcano. So we have 2 items up for November. We have the council chamber ADA improvement project. So that's slated for November. And then we're also planning to give a multimodal transportation master plan update. That project kicked off late last month. And so we're going to start doing regular updates to the policy committee here.
All right, looking forward to both of those. Thank you very much. And then let us confirm what I believe will be the final meeting of the year, right? So currently we're meeting on Thanksgiving Day. I think everyone's okay with that, right? We're not doing No, so I think before we went live, someone mentioned the 30th. And that actually would work for my calendar. We could do the 30th at, I guess, 1. How does that work for everybody?
I'm good.
All right, great. So we can make that happen then. Fantastic. All righty. And with that, I will see you all again on November 30th at 1 p.m. for TAPS, but I will probably see all of you for some other reason before that. So enjoy the weekend, stay warm, and take care. We're adjourned. Bye.